So, Professor, I do have quite a few questions for you. So, in terms of Lebanon, you mentioned, and with Lebanon, the scale of attacks have decreased. But if you look at it since the deal, every day is an escalation of the previous day. So, we are seeing escalations. I do interview a number of on the ground reporters in Lebanon. And I know it's a complex balance because I don't even know what the right decision is myself, in the sense of, on the one hand, they're carpet bombing civilian areas in Lebanon. They are killing people or injuring people depending on what day it is. On the other hand, the resistance in Lebanon is really punishing them quite a bit. So you basically got that balance, but quite clearly they're not following the deal. Quite clearly they're not following Article 1. And so the question mark becomes, how do you balance it? Now, if it was purely tactical and we took the emotion out of it, emotion being like these lives are obviously being lost, Lebanon is being bombed, but purely from a tactical perspective, obviously I think Iran's making the right move. The right move would be September, October, when it's critical for Trump to basically then start giving Trump more solid red lines where he's going to be desperate for the midterms, is the calculating decision. But obviously this is why I would never be a good leader, because it's the calculation requires a bit of understanding that these bombs are going to be happening in Lebanon. But on the other hand, you've got it where Trump's essentially told you the deal with Lebanon, the traitorous Lebanese government with Israel, with Marco Rubio, which was done days after this deal, the MOU deal, quite clearly is saying they're not going to abide by it because it's in a complete contradiction with the other one. You have the MOU deal, which says stop bombing Lebanon, leave Lebanon. This one's saying we're not going to leave Lebanon until there's no resistance, but there'll always be resistance when there's Israeli oppression. And so that just tells us there's never going to be a deal, right?
Everything that you said is accurate. I could say add a few things to it. According to the MOU, Iran is in charge of the Strait of Hormuz. The Americans are creating their own route through the Strait of Hormuz in violation of the agreement. The Americans are constantly threatening Iran, Trump is at least, and negotiators threatening to murder them. These are all violations of the MOU. It's in the MOU. He's not allowed to make threats, or the United States is not allowed to make threats. And then, of course, the treacherous puppets that they installed in Beirut, the president and the prime minister they don't have a popular mandate. The Americans and the Saudis installed them. They have gifted southern Lebanon to the Israeli regime. And that MOU, you're absolutely correct, came after the MOU with Iran, and it undermines that MOU. So the United States is willingly violating the MOU at every level. But in any case, Iran has leverage. Not only does Iran have a powerful military, which it is building up as we speak, and remember, Iran in the 12-day war ultimately defeated the Israeli regime, but it performed much better in the 39 days of fighting the year afterwards. Why? Because they learned from their experience. Now the Iranians are learning from their experience with the battles with the United States and the Israeli regime during the 39 days. And so the Iranian armed forces today is much more powerful in relative terms than it was 4 months ago, or 4.5 months ago. So the Iranians have leverage. They have the Strait of Hormuz. They have their armed forces, and they have the nuclear program. If the Americans want a nuclear deal with Iran, then they have to implement the first phase. Without implementing the first phase, there is no second phase. This is the key point. Don't believe the nonsense that comes out of Fox News. I just tweeted something that in response to rumors from Fox News that the Iranians are going to give up the Strait of Hormuz, or that the Iranians are going to they've decided not to purchase weapons from the assets that are supposed to be released. Iran doesn't need to purchase weapons from the assets that are released. If the Americans release them, the Iranians can purchase weapons if they need them from the oil wealth that they export, from their other exports. They don't need to use this particular money especially when it's in Qatar? Why would they allow the Americans to know what they're buying from where and how much? So that's just a narrative put out there by Fox News, probably by the Trump regime, in order to say that, look, we got these concessions from Iran. So that this is just my own personal interpretation. I don't know if it's correct. So, for example, if Trump does release the Iranian assets, the $12 billion, he can say, no, I prevented them from buying weapons. They cannot, use them for. Obviously, Iran is not going to buy anything sensitive from those $12 billion. If they want to buy anything sensitive, they'll use the wealth that they get from their own exports. And what they can purchase from this money could be food stuff, food supplies, medicine, whatever it is that the country needs. So these narratives that come out of Washington, a lot of them are just propaganda, and to convince the Trump base that Trump is tough, Trump is strong, and that he's winning and he's always winning. So Iran has these, if the United States wants to have a deal, a nuclear deal, they're going to have to force the Israelis to leave Lebanon. They're going to have to release Iranian assets. There's no other way around it. And if they want the normalization of the Strait of Hormuz, well, then they're going to have to abide by those commitments too. There's no other way around it. They didn't win the war, so it's not as if the Americans can say, well, we're going to wage a war against you. Okay, wage a war. Are you going to win a second war or a third war? Of course not. It will become much worse for the global economy, because the global economy will truly collapse this time. So we are where we are, and it's not going to be easy. I don't know where things are going to go. I don't have a crystal ball to see the future. It's many things can happen, but as you know better than I, the front in Ukraine is also becoming far more volatile, far more dangerous, and it's going to intensify the war. The war is going to intensify. That means that the United States, which is deeply involved in Ukraine, contrary to the nonsense that the Trump regime puts out there for the public, the West, the Europeans, the Americans are deeply involved in the ongoing conflict, and the United States needs to focus on that front too. So it's not as if the United States has a free hand to do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, and Iran knows that.